Dagult Neverember is one of the most controversial rulers in the Forgotten Realms. To some, he was the noble who rebuilt cities and brought stability to the Sword Coast. To others, he was a tyrant, a schemer, who used wealth and politics to grab power wherever he could. As Open Lord of Waterdeep and Lord Protector of Neverwinter, Dagult shaped two of the greatest cities in Faerun, and left behind a legacy of ambition, scandal, and hidden treasure. This is the story of a man who sought a crown, but was remembered instead as a lord without one. Waterdeep is called the City of Splendors, a place where merchants and nobles shaped the fate of the Sword Coast. But in the late 15th century, one man rose higher than most, a man of wealth, ambition, and charm, who would eventually be remembered as both savior and tyrant. His name was Dagult Neverember. To understand Dagult, you have to start with the city of his birth. Dagult was a nobleman of Waterdeep, a man of striking charisma and considerable wealth. He wasn't born into the most prestigious family, but what he lacked in bloodline, he made up more than for in ambition. Dagult was a schemer, a man who understood that gold could open doors even when noble bloodlines could not. Unlike many nobles who lived off inherited fortunes, Dagult actively invested in trade, construction, and public works. He poured money into Waterdeep's economy, and just as importantly, he made sure everybody knew about it. He cultivated the image of a generous noble, a man who cared deeply for the common folk, to a city used to aloof aristocrats. Dagult's populist style was refreshing, even inspiring. By 1479 DR, Dagult's influence reached its peak. He was appointed Open Lord of Waterdeep, the highest public office in the city. For many, this felt like a natural progression. After all, he had spent years presenting himself as a man of the people, a benefactor of the city. But beneath that polished surface, Dagult was always playing a deeper game. As Open Lord, Neverember continued his strategy of highly visible improvements. He financed roads, bridges, and fortifications. He expanded Waterdeep's trade network and sought to project the city as a beacon of stability along the Sword Coast. At first, it worked. Dagult was hailed as a visionary, a noble who cared about more than lining his own pockets. He seemed like the kind of leader Waterdeep needed during uncertain times. But even at the height of his popularity, there were whispers that Dagult wasn't paying for these projects out of his own generosity, but rather dipping into the city's coffers. Whispers that he was using Waterdeep's resources not only to enrich himself, but to lay the groundwork for even greater ambitions. Because for Dagult, Waterdeep wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. During his time as Open Lord, tragedy struck far to the north. The city of Neverwinter, one of the jewels of the north, was devastated when Mount Hotnow erupted. Thousands died. Neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, and what remained of the city descended into chaos. Bandits, monsters, and rival factions fought for scraps of control. The once proud jewel of the north was reduced to ash and ruin. And Dagult Neverember saw an opportunity. Drawing on his wealth and his political influence, Dagult presented himself not only as the Open Lord of Waterdeep, but also as the savior of Neverwinter. He declared himself as the Lord Protector of the ruined city, claiming that only his leadership could restore it. Some in Waterdeep were impressed by this show of strength. Others questioned how much of Waterdeep's treasury was quietly being funneled north. What mattered most was that Dagult had established a second seat of power. He was now more than a nobleman, more than a single city's Open Lord. Dagult Neverember was carving out his own realm, one coin at a time. And in that ambition, you can see the duality of Dagult's character. To some, he was a man of vision, a leader who stepped in when others would have turned away. To others, he was a tyrant in the making, using tragedy as a stepping stone toward greater power. This tension would define his entire career, and in time it would lead to his downfall. But in these early years, Dagult stood tall, The people of Waterdeep saw him as a strong, open lord. The people of Neverwinter, shattered by despair, looked at him as a savior. And Dagult himself saw nothing but opportunity. But of course, power never comes without enemies. When Mount Hotnow erupted, it nearly erased Neverwinter from the map. The Jewel of the North was shattered, its walls broken, and its people scattered. For decades, the once proud city limped along as a shadow of itself, plagued by monsters, mercenaries, and opportunists. By the time Dagult Neverember declared himself Lord Protector, Neverwinter was desperate for leadership, and Dagult was more than willing to step into that void. As Open Lord of Waterdeep, he claimed that he had both the coin and the vision to rebuild the city. He poured money into repairing the streets, restoring the walls, and restructuring the once beautiful districts of Neverwinter. He hired mercenaries to patrol the streets, built up local defenses, and presented himself as the savior who could restore the city's lost glory. At first glance, it looked like genuine generosity. To the outside world, Dagult was a nobleman who had stretched his hand north to lift up a fallen city. But anyone living under his rule soon learned the cost of that generosity. Dagult wasn't an elected leader, nor was he chosen by the people of Neverwinter. He had simply declared himself Lord Protector, and then enforced that title with coin and steel. His mercenaries answered to him alone. His rebuilding projects were carefully crafted to keep his name at the center of public life, and his taxes and levies made it clear Neverember's hand was firmly on the city's throat. It was an odd kind of rule. Dagult didn't crown himself king, and he never pretended to be the rightful heir to Neverwinter's throne. Instead, he claimed he was a steward, a temporary leader holding power until the city was strong enough to govern itself. But the truth was clear to anyone who looked closer. Dagult had no intention of giving up control. In the Neverwinter Campaign Setting for 4th edition, this period of Dagult's rule is described in great detail. He poured enormous resources into fortifications, guilds, and public works. He even commissioned statues of himself across the city, cementing his image as the city's savior. But behind the propaganda, locals whispered that Dagult was siphoning Waterdeep's wealth into Neverwinter, enriching himself while weakening his rivals in the City of Splendors. This created deep resentment, of course. Many of Neverwinter's surviving noble families despised Dagult, viewing him as an opportunistic outsider who had stolen their city in its moment of weakness. Even common folk, while benefiting from the restoration, grumbled at the iron grip of his mercenaries and the taxes demanded to fund his projects. And then there were the factions. The Harpers, always suspicious of tyrants, watched Dagult closely. The Zhentarim sought to exploit the unrest and profit from Neverember's distractions. Even the sons of Alagondar, rebels claiming descent from Neverwinter's last ruling dynasty, began plotting against him. To them, Dagult wasn't a savior, he was an invader. But Dagult had two advantages that kept him in power. First, his sheer wealth. Gold, paved roads, built walls, and paid soldiers. And second, his charisma. For all of his corruption, Dagult could be charming, persuasive, and even inspiring when he wanted to be. He understood the value of appearances, and he wielded them like a weapon. This dual image, the savior rebuilding Neverwinter, and the tyrant holding it in a gilded cage, defined his rule. To allies, he was a stabilizing force in a dangerous world. To enemies, he was a usurper, fattening himself on the corpse of a wounded city. And while Dagult claimed to serve both Waterdeep and Neverwinter, his loyalties were becoming clearer by the day. The more time and treasure he invested in Neverwinter, the more Waterdeep's nobles began to ask, was their open lord abandoning them? The answer would come soon enough. Dagult's double life ruling two cities at once was unsustainable. And when his enemies in Waterdeep finally struck back, Dagult's entire career would collapse in scandal. Dagult Neverember's double life as both Open Lord of Waterdeep and Lord Protector of Neverwinter could not last forever. For a time he balanced both roles, pouring gold into public projects and surrounding himself with loyal mercenaries. But in the end, even Dagult's wealth and charisma couldn't hold back the tide of scandal. The cracks first appeared in Waterdeep. The nobles and masked lords began to question why so much of the city's wealth was vanishing into thin air. Dagult's lavish rebuilding efforts in Neverwinter were no secret, and rumors spread that he was diverting Waterdeep's treasury north to fund his second empire. For the common folk, this betrayal stung deeply. The man who had once promised to be a noble of the people was revealed as just another politician fattening himself on public coin. And for the masked lords, who already guarded their city with deep suspicion of corruption, this was unforgivable. Dagult's enemies in Waterdeep had gathered enough evidence and enough anger to act. The masked lords called for his removal, and Dagult was stripped of his title as Open Lord of Waterdeep. His decade-long reign had come to an end, not with a triumphant exit, but with disgrace and exposure. And yet Dagult didn't fade quietly into the background. If anything, losing Waterdeep only made him cling more tightly to Neverwinter. He abandoned his hold on the City of Splendors, retreating north to rule his Jewel of the North with even greater ferocity. Neverember's dreams of being the power behind two cities had failed, but he wasn't done with this Game of Thrones. His replacement in Waterdeep was none other than Lariel Silverhand, chosen by the masked lords and guided by the goddess Mystra herself. Where Dagult's rule had been marked by corruption and heavy-handed displays of wealth, Lariel's leadership was built on wisdom, humility, and a genuine desire to heal the city. In every way, she was a direct rebuke to Dagult's style of rule. And in that contrast, Dagult's reputation sank even further. But perhaps the most personal wound was the one inflicted by his own family. Dagult's son, Renaer, Neverember, had long despised his father's greed and corruption. Unlike Dagult, Renaer cared little for wealth or power. He rejected his father's methods and distanced himself from the Neverember name, choosing a life of quiet integrity among the nobles of Waterdeep. The feud between father and son became legendary. Dagult disowned Renaer, cutting him off from the family fortune, and Renaer, in turn, became one of his father's harshest critics. This bitter divide set the stage for one of 5th edition's most famous adventures, Waterdeep Dragon Heist. In that story, the entire plot revolves around a treasure hoard hidden by Dagult Neverember during his final years as Open Lord, known as the Vault of Dragons. It contained 500,000 gold coins, money siphoned from Waterdeep's treasury and hidden away for Dagult's own use. That treasure was not only proof of his corruption, but also the spark that ignited chaos in the city. Criminal factions, rival nobles, and adventurers all fought to claim it. At the center of the storm stood Renaer, forced to clean up the mess his father had left behind. For all his grand speeches about restoring Neverwinter and strengthening Waterdeep, Dagult's legacy had become one of greed, betrayal, and hidden treasure. He had been cast down from the highest office in the City of Splendors. His name was synonymous with corruption, and even his own son wanted nothing to do with him. Yet Dagult was not finished. Stripped of Waterdeep, he tightened his grip on Neverwinter. Cast out by his family, he turned to mercenaries and gold to maintain power. Even in disgrace, he refused to step aside. And so, the man who hailed as a savior was now seen as a usurper, clinging to the throne of a broken city. But Dagult's story doesn't end with his fall, because even as he lost Waterdeep, his schemes rippled outward into the wider world. By the end of the 1480s, Dagult Neverember was no longer Open Lord of Waterdeep. His power in the City of Splendors had collapsed, his corruption laid bare, and his son Renaer had rejected him. But Dagult was not a man who accepted defeat easily. Instead, he retreated to Neverwinter, the city he had claimed as his own. There, he dug in. As Lord Protector of Neverwinter, Dagult ruled with an iron hand. He was not a king, nor was he a rightful heir, but he styled himself as a city savior and steward. While mercenaries and coin, he held the city together, restoring districts, rebuilding defenses, and slowly transforming Neverwinter from a broken ruin into a functioning power once again. But for all his claims of selflessness, Dagult never stopped scheming. His hidden wealth became infamous across the Sword Coast. That hoard, the Vault of Dragons, was more than just a pile of gold. It was a symbol of his corruption, proof that Dagult had always been as much a thief as a benefactor. The events of Waterdeep Dragon Heist ensure that adventurers and factions alike would forever remember Dagult as a man whose treasure nearly tore the city apart. Even beyond Waterdeep and Neverwinter, Dagult's name surfaced again and again. During the events of Tyranny of Dragons, Dagult appeared at the Council of Waterdeep, representing Neverwinter's interests, while the Sword Coast faced the threat of Tiamat's cult. There he played the role of a seasoned politician, negotiating with rival leaders and pushing for his city's security above all else. For players in that campaign, Dagult's presence was a reminder that politics and ambition could shape the fate of the realms just as much as dragons or magic. In the novels of the Neverwinter saga written by R.A. Salvatore, Dagult lurked in the background as a political force, directing mercenaries, guilds, and agents in a constant effort to solidify his hold on the city. He was never a frontline warrior or a grand sorcerer. His power came from coin, charisma, and cunning. And for a time, that was enough to keep Neverwinter alive. But in the end, Dagult Neverember's story is not one of triumph. His power was always temporary, built on wealth and manipulation rather than legitimacy. His legacy is one of contradictions. To some, he will always be the man who saved Neverwinter from total collapse. Without Dagult, the city might never have risen from the ashes of Mount Hotnow. His wealth and leadership did bring stability when none else would. But to others, he is remembered as a tyrant, a man who stole Waterdeep's wealth, declared himself ruler without right, and clung to power long after he should have stepped aside. His estrangement from his son, his downfall in Waterdeep, and the chaos of the Vault of Dragons all speak to a darker truth, that Dagult cared less for the people he ruled than for the power he could wield over them. This is why history calls him the Lord without a crown. He was never a king, never a rightful monarch. But for a brief, turbulent period, he ruled two of the greatest cities of the Sword Coast through coin, charisma, and his sheer ambition. Dagult Neverember's tale reminds us that in the Forgotten Realms, power is not always held by the strongest sword or the mightiest spell. Sometimes it belongs to the man with the deepest pockets and the boldest schemes. And while his reign is long over, the shadow he casts still lingers. Every adventurer who chases rumors of lost treasure, every noble who whispers about corruption in high places, and every player who uncovers the Vault of Dragons is, in some way, still dealing with the legacy of Dagult Neverember, the Lord without a crown. Though Dagult Neverember's time as a ruler ended in scandal and exile, his story did not vanish with him. He remained in Neverwinter, clinging to his power as his Lord Protector, but by the 1490s his grip on the city had weakened. His reputation as a tyrant and thief haunted him, and though he still commanded mercenaries and coin, the respect of his peers was gone. His greatest failure, however, was not political, it was personal. His estrangement from his son, Renaer, cut deeper than any scandal in Waterdeep or uprising in Neverwinter. Renaer rejected his father's greed and ambition, carving his own path as an ally of adventurers and a member of the Harpers. Where Dagult hoarded wealth, Renaer gave freely. Where Dagult schemed, Renaer sought justice. In many ways, Renaer became the man Dagult never was. A leader admired for integrity rather than feared for ambition. Dagult's legacy in Faerun is therefore divided. To the people of Waterdeep, his name is a curse, forever tied to the theft of the city's dragon hoard and the chaos of the Vault of Dragons. To the people of Neverwinter, he is remembered both as a tyrant and as a restorer, the man who rebuilt their walls, but also the man who ruled without right. In the grand histories of the realms, Dagult stands as a reminder that power gained through wealth and ambition alone rarely lasts. True rulers, like Lariel Silverhead of Waterdeep, led with legitimacy and respect. Dagult Neverember led with coin and cunning. And in the end, that was never enough. His shadow may still linger on the politics of the Sword Coast, but the crown he coveted was never his to wear. Dagult Neverember will be remembered as both savior and thief, tyrant and protector, forever the Lord without a crown. And there you have it, the full story of Dagult Neverember, a man whose ambition, wealth, and cunning shaped two of the greatest cities on the Sword Coast. From his rise as open lord of Waterdeep, to his bold claim as Lord Protector of Neverwinter, to his fall from grace and lasting legacy, Dagult's life is a tale of contrasts: savior or tyrant, visionary or schemer. The answer is complicated. Dagult's story shows us that in the Forgotten Realms, power can come from many forms: gold, influence, charisma, and that ambition often leaves a trail of both triumph and scandal. Whether you admire him, despise him, or just find him fascinating, his mark on Waterdeep, Neverwinter, and stories of the Sword Coast is undeniable. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the realm's most controversial rulers, make sure to like, subscribe, and check out the Dungeon Puffin lore videos that we already have on this channel. And if there's a character or city that you want to see explored in detail next, I am thinking Waterdeep seems logical, leave a comment below. I read everyone, and your suggestions often shape upcoming videos. So thanks for joining me, and remember, in Faerun, the biggest stories are often written by those who never wear a crown. This is James from the Dungeon Puffin. Later, guys.